Introduction. Welcome to another captivating story that will touch your heart and keep you on the edge of your seat. If you enjoy stories of resilience, unexpected connections, and the untamed spirit of the American West, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss our latest tales. Now, let's dive into the story of Sarah and the mysterious stranger who changed everything. Chapter 1. The determined pioneer. The Montana wilderness stretched endlessly under the pale morning sun, its vastness broken only by the rhythmic sound of an axe biting into wood. Sarah Mitchell wiped the sweat from her brow with the back of her work glove, leaving a streak of sawdust across her forehead. At 28, she possessed the kind of determination that could move mountains, or in her case, build a cabin from scratch in the middle of nowhere, one log at a time, she whispered to herself, a mantra that had kept her going through 3 months of backbreaking work. The foundation stones she'd carefully selected from the nearby creek bed were already in place, and now the walls were slowly taking shape. Each pine log had been felled, stripped, and notched by her own hands. Sarah had left Boston 6 months ago, fleeing a life that felt suffocating. Her engagement to William Hartwell, a banker's son with political ambitions, had ended when she discovered his affair with her sister. The scandal had rocked their social circle, but Sarah found herself oddly relieved. The prospect of a life spent attending tea parties and charity galas had always felt like a prison sentence. Her grandmother's letters had painted Montana Territory as a land of opportunity, where someone with grit could carve out their own destiny. When the old woman passed away, leaving Sarah a modest inheritance, the decision was made. She would build something with her own hands, create a life that belonged entirely to her. The nearest town, Copper Creek, was 15 miles away, enough for supplies but far enough to ensure solitude. The land agent had warned her about the isolation, the harsh winters, the dangers of living alone. Sarah had simply nodded and signed the papers. As she positioned another log, Sarah caught a glimpse of movement in the tree line about 2 yards away. She paused, shielding her eyes against the sun. Nothing. Probably just a deer or elk. Wildlife was abundant here, and she'd learned to share the space with her 4-legged neighbors. What she didn't know was that for the past 2 weeks, someone had been watching her work. Marcus Kane crouched behind a cluster of aspen trees, his weathered hands gripping a pair of field glasses. At 35, he'd spent the last decade living like a ghost in these mountains, trading pelts in town just often enough to buy supplies before disappearing back into the wilderness. Marcus had first spotted Sarah during one of his rare trips to Copper Creek. She'd been loading lumber onto a wagon, arguing with the supplier about the quality of the wood. Her voice had carried across the street, not shrill or demanding, but firm and knowledgeable. She knew what she was talking about, and she wasn't going to be cheated. Curiosity had gotten the better of him. He'd followed her wagon at a distance, watched her unload the lumber at her building site, seen her survey the land with the eye of someone who understood construction. Most people would have hired help for such an undertaking. This woman was doing it all herself. Marcus lowered the field glasses and rubbed his bearded jaw. He told himself he was just keeping an eye on a neighbor, making sure she was safe. The truth was more complicated. There was something about her determination, the way she attacked each task with methodical precision, that reminded him of someone he'd lost long ago. Back at the construction site, Sarah had managed to maneuver the heavy log into position. She stepped back to admire her progress, and for the first time in hours, a genuine smile crossed her face. The walls were nearly chest-high now. At this rate, she'd have the basic structure completed before the first snow. That smile hit Marcus like a physical blow. Hidden in his observation post, he felt something crack inside his chest, a wall he'd built around his heart 10 years ago. When pneumonia had taken his wife and infant daughter, he'd come to these mountains to forget, to let the wilderness scour away his capacity for feeling. But this woman's simple expression of joy and accomplishment had somehow reached across the distance and touched something he thought was dead. Sarah's workday continued until the sun began its descent toward the western peaks. She gathered her tools with practiced efficiency, storing them in the weatherproof box she'd constructed near the building site. Tomorrow she would raise another course of logs. Tomorrow she would be one step closer to having a real home. As she walked to her temporary compass, sturdy canvas tent pitched beside a clear stream, Sarah felt eyes upon her. She turned slowly, scanning the forest edge. The feeling persisted, but she saw nothing unusual. Living alone had sharpened her instincts, and something was definitely out there. "Hello?" she called out, her voice carrying across the meadow. "If someone's there, you might as well show yourself." Marcus held his breath, pressing himself lower behind the trees. After a long moment, Sarah shrugged and continued toward her tent. But she walked with more awareness now, her head turning slightly to catch any sound from the forest. That evening, as Sarah prepared her simple dinner over a small fire, she found herself thinking about the persistent feeling of being watched. It wasn't malevolent, she was sure of that. More like, protective, curious. If someone was out there, they'd had plenty of opportunities to approach or cause trouble. The fact that they remained hidden suggested either extreme shyness or genuine concern for her well-being. "Well, whoever you are," she said aloud, stirring beans in her iron pot, You're welcome to share a meal if you're hungry. These mountains are big enough for all of us. Her words carried across the meadow to where Marcus sat beside his own small, smokeless fire. The invitation tugged at something deep inside him. When was the last time someone had offered him kindness without expecting anything in return? When was the last time he'd shared a conversation with another human being that went beyond the bare necessities of commerce? He almost stood up, almost walked across that meadow and introduced himself, but the weight of his solitude held him back. He'd been alone so long that the thought of human interaction felt both thrilling and terrifying. Instead, he remained in the shadows, watching as Sarah finished her meal and banked her fire. She moved with the easy confidence of someone comfortable in the wilderness, but there was also a subtle loneliness in the way she lingered by the dying flames. Staring up at the star-filled sky, Marcus understood that loneliness. It was the companion that had kept him alive through 10 years of self-imposed exile. But seeing it reflected in another person made his own isolation feel suddenly unbearable. As Sarah disappeared into her tent, Marcus made a decision. Tomorrow, he would find a way to help her without revealing himself, at least not yet. He'd noticed the way she struggled with the heavier logs, the slight limp she tried to hide after particularly strenuous days. There were ways to assist without intruding on her independence. The mountains held their breath under a canopy of stars, and two solitary souls settled into an uneasy sleep, each unaware of how their lives were about to become intertwined. Chapter 2. Silent Guardian. The next morning dawned crisp and clear, with the kind of mountain air that made every breath feel like a blessing. Sarah emerged from her tent, stretching and ready for another day of construction. She'd slept better than expected, despite the persistent feeling that she wasn't entirely alone in the wilderness. Her morning routine was efficient and well-practiced. A quick wash in the stream, a breakfast of coffee, hardtack and dried fruit, then a careful inspection of her tools and materials. She'd learned to inventory everything daily, losing or breaking. A crucial tool could set her back weeks. As she approached her construction site, Sarah stopped short. 3 perfectly sized logs lay beside her foundation, stripped of bark and ready for use. They hadn't been there when she'd quit work the previous evening. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs as she examined the logs more closely. The workmanship was excellent, better than her own. If she was being honest, the bark had been removed with expert precision, and the wood showed no signs of damage or poor handling. Someone with considerable skill had prepared these logs specifically for her project. "Hello," she called out, more insistently this time. "I know, you're out there. Show yourself." The forest remained silent, except for the whisper of wind through pine boughs. Sarah walked slowly around the perimeter of her building site, looking for tracks or any other signs of her mysterious benefactor. She found boot prints in the soft earth near the stream, large, worn boots with a distinctive nick in the left heel. Marcus watched from his concealed position, his chest tight with anxiety. He'd worked through most of the night to prepare those logs, driven by an impulse he couldn't fully understand. The look of struggle on Sarah's face the previous day had compelled him to act, but now he questioned the wisdom of revealing his presence, even indirectly. Sarah stood with her hands on her hips, studying the gift logs with a mixture of gratitude and wariness. After several minutes, she seemed to reach a decision. "Whoever you are," she called to the forest, "thank you. These are beautiful logs, and I appreciate the help, but I'd rather meet you face to face than play this guessing game." When no response came, Sarah sighed, but began the process of incorporating the new logs into her construction. They fit perfectly, as if her anonymous helper understood exactly what she was building and how. The precision unnerved her almost as much as it impressed her. Marcus felt a surge of pride watching Sarah work with the logs he'd prepared. She handled them with respect and skill, her movements economical and sure. But he also saw the way she periodically glanced toward the tree line, the tension in her shoulders that spoke of controlled unease. As the day progressed, Sarah found herself talking to the forest as she worked. It started as muttered complaints about the weight of the logs, but gradually evolved into something resembling conversation. "You did good work on these," she said, notching another log. "Better than good, you know construction, don't you? This isn't random kindness. You understand what I'm trying to build here?" She paused in her work, wiping sweat from her face. "I came out here to be independent, to prove I could make it on my own. But I'm not too proud to accept help when it's offered in good faith. Still, I'd sleep easier knowing who you are and what you want." Marcus found himself leaning forward, hanging on every word. Her voice carried a mixture of strength and vulnerability that resonated in his chest, like the strings of a long silent instrument. When was the last time anyone had spoken to him, Evan, unknowingly, with such honest directness? The afternoon brought a crisis that tested both Sarah's resolve and Marcus's commitment to remaining hidden. Sarah was attempting to position a particularly heavy log when her makeshift pulley system failed. The rope snapped, and the log crashed down. Pinning her left leg against the foundation stones, Sarah cried out in pain and shock, struggling to free herself. The log was too heavy to move alone, and her position was awkward, limiting her leverage. Panic began to creep into her voice as she realized the seriousness of her situation. "Help," she shouted, abandoning any pretense of self-reliance. "Someone, help me." Marcus was on his feet before conscious thought could intervene. His decade of isolation evaporated in an instant, replaced by urgent concern for another human being in distress. He crashed through the underbrush without regard for stealth, covering the distance to Sarah's construction site in long, powerful strides. Sarah looked up in shock as a tall, bearded figure emerged from the forest. Marcus Kane looked like something out of a frontier legend, weather-beaten leather clothing, steel gray eyes, and the kind of quiet competence that came from years of surviving in harsh conditions. Without a word, he positioned himself beside the fallen log and lifted it with surprising ease, freeing Sarah's trapped leg. "Can you move it?" he asked, his voice rough from disuse. Sarah tested her leg gingerly. Pain shot through her ankle, but nothing seemed broken. "I think so. Just twisted, maybe sprained." Marcus extended a work-hardened hand to help her stand. Sarah hesitated for just a moment before accepting the assistance. His grip was steady and warm, and she found herself looking into eyes that held depths of sadness she recognized. "You're my mysterious helper," she said, not quite making it a question. Marcus nodded, suddenly self-conscious under her direct gaze. "Marcus Kane, I live up in the mountains. Sarah Mitchell, and I live wherever I can get this cabin finished." She gestured toward her construction project, then winced as weight shifted to her injured ankle. "You shouldn't put weight on that," Marcus said. "Let me help you to your tent." Sarah wanted to protest, to maintain her independence, but practical necessity overruled pride. She accepted Marcus's support, leaning against his solid frame as they made their way to her camp. He moved with surprising gentleness for such a large man, adjusting his pace to match her limping gait. As they reached her tent, Sarah studied his weathered face. "How long have you been watching me?" "Couple of weeks," Marcus admitted, his eyes focused on the ground. "Didn't mean any harm. Just, curious, I guess." "Curious about what?" Marcus was quiet for so long that Sarah thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "About someone brave, enough to build a life with their own hands. About someone who talks to the mountains like they're listening." He looked up then, meeting her eyes for the first time since he'd emerged from the forest. "About someone who smiles when they finish a good day's work." Sarah felt something shift in her chest, a recognition of shared loneliness, perhaps, or simply the human need for connection after months of solitude. "Would you like some coffee? It's not much, but it's hot." Marcus hesitated, clearly torn between his ingrained isolation and genuine human need. "I should go. Make sure you're all right, then head back up the mountain." "Marcus?" Sarah's voice stopped him as he turned to leave. "I've been alone out here for 3 months. You've been alone up there for, how long? 10 years? Give or take? Then, maybe we've both been alone long enough." The invitation hung in the air between them like a bridge neither was sure they should cross. Marcus looked at Sarah's face open, hopeful, but prepared for rejection, and felt the last of his defenses. "Coffee sounds good," he said quietly, as Sarah busied herself with the coffee preparations. Favoring her injured ankle, Marcus found himself studying her camp with professional interest. Everything was organized, efficient, and built to last. This wasn't the setup of someone playing at frontier life. This was the home of someone committed to making a genuine go of it in the wilderness. "You've done good work here," he said, accepting a tin cup of strong coffee. "Thanks. Though I have to admit, those logs you prepared saved me at least 2 days of work." Sarah settled beside her small fire, stretching her injured leg out carefully. "Why did you help without showing yourself?" Marcus stared into his coffee, searching for words to explain something he barely understood himself. "I've been alone so long, I forgot how to be around people. But watching you work, seeing your determination, it reminded me that there are still good things in the world worth protecting." "What made you choose solitude?" The question hung heavy between them. Marcus took a long sip of coffee, buying time, wrestling with memories he'd spent a decade trying to bury. "Lost my family," he said finally. "Wife and baby daughter. Pneumonia took them both in the span of a week. I came up here to forget, but forgetting's harder than it looks." Sarah's expression softened with understanding and compassion. "I'm sorry. That's a loss no one should have to bear. What about you? What brings a woman to the Montana wilderness? To build a cabin by herself?" Sarah's laugh held little humor. "A broken engagement, a betrayal by someone I trusted, and the realization that the life I was expected to live would slowly kill my spirit." She gestured toward her half-built cabin. "This isn't about running away, it's about running toward something real." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains. The silence wasn't awkward or forced, it was the natural quiet of two people who had found in each other's company a respite from their respective solitudes. "I should check that ankle," Marcus said eventually. "I know something about treating injuries." Sarah nodded, extending her leg toward him. Marcus's examination was thorough but gentle, his large hands surprisingly careful as he tested for swelling and range of motion. "Sprained, but not badly," he pronounced. "Keep weight off it for a day or two, and it should heal fine. That'll set my construction back." "Maybe," Marcus said, meeting her eyes. "Or maybe you could accept a little more help from a neighbor." The offer was tentative, laden with the weight of his long isolation and her fierce independence. Sarah studied his face, seeing past the wilderness-worn exterior to the decent man beneath. "I'd like that," she said simply. As darkness settled over the mountains, two lonely souls sat by a small fire, each surprised to discover that solitude, while sometimes necessary, didn't have to be permanent. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for the first time in months, neither of them would face those challenges entirely alone. Chapter 3. Building trust. The morning arrived with an unseasonable chill that hinted at the harsh winter to come. Sarah woke to find frost covering her tent and the distant peaks dusted with fresh snow. Her ankle throbbed with a dull ache, but the pain was manageable, nothing that would stop her from working. Though Marcus's advice about keeping weight often echoed in her mind, she emerged from her tent to find Marcus crouched beside a small fire, a coffee pot already warming over the flames. He looked up as she approached, his expression uncertain. "Hope you don't mind," he said, gesturing toward the fire. "Thought you might appreciate coffee without having to build a fire on that ankle?" Sarah felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the flames. "I don't mind at all, thank you." They shared breakfast in the easy silence that had developed between them the previous evening. Marcus had brought fresh trout from the stream, and Sarah contributed the last of her preserved peaches. It was a simple meal, but eating in company after months of solitude felt like a luxury. "How's the ankle this morning?" Marcus asked as they finished eating. Sarah tested it gingerly. "Better, still tender, but I can put weight on it. Maybe you should take it easy for another day. Let me work on the cabin." Sarah's independent streak immediately rebelled against the suggestion. "It's my cabin, Marcus. I appreciate the help, but I'm not going to sit around while someone else builds my home." Marcus raised his hands in a gesture of surrender. "Didn't mean to overstep. How about we work together? You can direct, I can do the heavy lifting." The compromise felt acceptable. Sarah nodded, and they made their way to the construction site. In the clear morning light, the progress looked more substantial than it had seemed during the grinding daily work. The cabin's walls were chest-high and solid, with only a few more courses needed to reach the roofline. "You've done impressive work," Marcus said, running his hand along one of the logs. "Most people would have hired a crew for something like this." "Most people have more money than I do," Sarah replied. "Besides, I wanted to prove I could do it myself, and you have. Accepting help doesn't diminish what you've accomplished." Sarah studied his weathered face, seeing understanding rather than judgment. "Is that something you learned up in the mountains, or something you're still learning?" Marcus's smile was rueful. "Still learning, I guess. 10 years of solitude teaches you a lot about independence, but not much about accepting kindness." They fell into a working rhythm that felt surprisingly natural. Sarah directed the placement of each log while Marcus provided the muscle for the heavy lifting. His experience showed in the quality of his work joints that fit perfectly, measurements that were precise, techniques that would ensure the cabin's longevity. "You know construction," Sarah observed as they positioned another log. "My father was a carpenter back in Missouri. I learned from him before." Marcus trailed off, then forced himself to continue. "Before I married Elizabeth and we headed west to start a ranch." "What happened to the ranch?" "Sold it after they died. Couldn't bear to stay in the house we'd built together." Marcus hefted another log, his movements sharp with old pain. "Some things are too full of memories to keep." Sarah understood the weight of memories that could make familiar places unbearable. "That's part of why I came here. Too many ghosts in Boston." They worked steadily through the morning, pausing periodically for water and to rest Sarah's ankle. The physical labor felt goodness and productive in a way that her former life had never been. But more than that, working alongside Marcus felt right. He anticipated her needs, understood her vision for the cabin, and contributed his expertise. Without trying to take over the project, around midday, they were interrupted by the sound of approaching horses. Sarah looked up to see 3 riders cresting the ridge to the east, moving deliberately toward the construction site. "Expecting company?" Marcus asked, his voice suddenly tense. "No one knows I'm here except the land agent in town." Sarah shaded, her eyes against the sun, trying to make out the riders' faces. "I don't recognize them." Marcus's posture had changed, becoming alert and wary. His hand moved unconsciously toward the knife at his belt. "Might want to let me do the talking." The riders were close enough now for Sarah to see their faces. 3 rough-looking men with the kind of weather-beaten features that spoke of hard living. The leader, a man with graying hair and cold eyes, touched his hat brim in a mockery of politeness. "Afternoon, folks," he said, his voice carrying an undertone of menace. "Name's Tucker. This is my land you're building on." Sarah stepped forward, ignoring Marcus's restraining hand on her arm. "This land was purchased legally through the Territorial Land Office. I have the deed." Tucker's smile was unpleasant. "Well now, that's a problem. See, I've been using this valley for grazing for the past 5 years. Prior used Trump's paper from some government office back east." "That's not how the law works," Sarah said firmly. "Out here, miss, the law is what we make it." Tucker's companions spread out slightly, flanking their leader. "Now, I'm a reasonable man. I'll give you $50 for whatever materials you can salvage, and you can be on your way." Marcus stepped forward, placing himself slightly in front of Sarah. The lady's not interested in selling. Tucker's attention shifted to Marcus, and his expression hardened. Cain should have known you'd turn up eventually, still hiding in the mountains like a kicked dog. Sarah felt the tension radiating from Marcus's body, saw his hands clench into fists. There was clearly history between these men, and none of it good. This doesn't concern you, Tucker, Marcus said quietly. Oh, but it does. You see, Cain here used to own the prettiest little ranch in the valley, had a sweet wife, baby daughter. Then sickness came calling, and our hermit friend here couldn't take the pain, ran off to the mountains and left all that good land sitting empty. Sarah saw Marcus flinch as if struck. Tucker's cruel words were calculated to wound, and they found their mark. That's enough, Sarah said sharply. You need to leave. Now? Tucker's laugh was harsh. You're in no position to make demands, sweetheart. This land is mine by right of use, and I don't intend to let some eastern lady and a broken-down hermit change that. The threat was unmistakable. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air, but she refused to show fear. I'm not leaving. This is my land, and this is going to be my home. We'll see about that. Tucker gathered his reins, preparing to leave. You've got 3 days to clear out. After that, things might get unpleasant. The 3 riders wheeled their horses and rode back the way they'd come, leaving Sarah and Marcus standing in tense silence. Sarah could see the toll the encounter had taken on Marcus. His shoulders were rigid with suppressed emotion, and his face had gone pale beneath his tan. Who is he? Sarah asked gently. Tucker runs cattle through most of the valley. He's been pressuring small landowners to sell out for years, using intimidation when money doesn't work. Marcus's voice was tight with controlled anger. He's also the man who refused to send for a doctor when Elizabeth and the baby got sick, said it was just a cold, not worth the expense. Sarah felt a surge of fury on Marcus's behalf. The casual cruelty of withholding medical aid from a sick woman and child went beyond mere business disputes into something darker. We can't let him drive me off, Sarah said firmly. We. Marcus looked at her with surprise. You think I'm facing this alone? You helped me build this cabin, Marcus. As far as I'm concerned, you have as much stake in defending it as I do. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, staring at the half-finished cabin. Tucker's not just making idle threats. He's got the men and the will to make life very difficult. Then we'd better be ready for him. Sarah's voice carried a determination that surprised them both. I didn't come this far to be bullied by some cattle baron with delusions of ownership. They spent the rest of the day working on the cabin with renewed urgency. If trouble was coming, they needed shelter and a defensible position. Marcus's military experience, a detail Sarah was just learning about, showed in the way he evaluated the site's defensive possibilities. The cabin's well-positioned, he said as they worked. Good sightlines, water source nearby, difficult to approach without being seen. You think it'll come to that? With Tucker? It's possible. He's used to getting his way through intimidation, but you don't seem like the intimidating type. Sarah's smile was grim. He's about to learn that appearances can be deceiving. As the sun set behind the mountains, they sat by their evening fire, both lost in their own thoughts. The encounter with Tucker had changed something between them. What had begun as neighborly assistance was evolving into something deeper, a partnership forged by shared adversity. I should head back up to my camp, Marcus said eventually, though he made no move to leave. You could stay, Sarah said quietly. I have an extra blanket, and honestly, I'd feel better knowing you were nearby. Marcus studied her face in the firelight, seeing not fear but trust that he realized he wanted desperately to be worthy of all right. But I'll take first watch. Tucker might try something tonight. Sarah nodded, understanding that they had crossed a threshold. This was no longer just about building a cabin, or even defending her land. This was about 2 people who had found something worth protecting in each other's company. Something worth fighting for. As Sarah settled into her tent, and Marcus took up position with his rifle, both understood that the next few days would test not only their resolve but the fragile bond that was growing between them. Tucker represented more than just a threat to Sarah's homestead. He was a challenge to their emerging partnership, their tentative steps toward healing old wounds and building something new together. The mountains stood silent around them, and 2 people who had been alone too long prepared to face whatever challenges the dawn might bring, knowing that whatever happened, they would no longer face it alone. Chapter 4. Home at last. The attack came at dawn on the second day, just as the first pale light began to touch the mountain peaks. Sarah woke to the sound of Marcus's urgent whisper outside her tent. Sarah, wake up. We've got company. She rolled out of her bedroll, already reaching for the rifle she'd kept beside her through the restless night. Through the tent flap, she could see Marcus crouched behind the woodpile they'd strategically positioned as a defensive barrier. How many? She whispered, crawling to join him. 5 riders coming up from the south. Tucker and his men, plus 2 I don't recognize. Sarah peered around the edge of the woodpile and saw them 5 mounted figures moving deliberately across the meadow, making no attempt at stealth. They wanted to be seen, wanted to intimidate through the show of force. Remember what we discussed, Marcus said quietly. Let me do the talking first. If shooting starts, Get behind the cabin foundation and stay low. Sarah nodded, though every fiber of her being rebelled against the idea of hiding while Marcus faced the threat alone. She'd come too far and fought too hard to cower now. Tucker and his men drew rein about 50 yards from the cabin site, well within rifle range but far enough away to make conversation necessary. Tucker's voice carried clearly across the morning air. Time's up, lady. I gave you 3 days, but I'm feeling generous this morning. One last chance to take my offer and ride out peacefully. Sarah stood up slowly, her rifle held ready but not quite aimed at the riders. And I told you this is my land. I'm not leaving. Stubborn, Tucker said, shaking his head with mock sadness. I was hoping you'd see reason. Kane, you want to talk? Sense into your lady friend. Marcus rose to stand beside Sarah, his own rifle held with the casual competence of a man who knew how to use it. She's made her position clear. Tucker, you're the one who needs to see reason. Tucker's expression hardened. You always were a fool, Kane. Could have had everything: good land, respect, a place in the community. Instead, you ran off to play hermit in the mountains. I had everything that mattered, Marcus replied, his voice steady, despite the pain Sarah could hear beneath the words. You made sure I lost it. Your wife and kid died of sickness, Kane. Nothing anyone could have done. A doctor might have helped. But you convinced everyone it wasn't worth the expense, that it was just a cold that would pass. The accusation hung in the air like a physical thing. Sarah saw Tucker's jaw tighten, his facade of reasonableness slipping. What's done is done, Tucker said harshly. But I won't let you and your woman ruin what I've built in this valley. Then you'd better ride away, Sarah said clearly, because I'm not going anywhere. Tucker's smile was cold and ugly. We'll see about that, boys. The 5 riders spurred, their horses forward in a coordinated charge, clearly intending to scatter Sarah and Marcus through intimidation. But Marcus had spent 10 years hunting in these mountains, and his reflexes were still sharp. His first shot took down Tucker's horse, sending the man tumbling to the ground in a tangle of leather and cursing. Sarah's shot followed immediately, her bullet splitting the air inches from the second rider's head, close enough to make her point without killing. The man yanked his reins hard, wheeling his horse away from the cabin's sight. The charge faltered as Marcus's second shot sent another rider's hat flying. These weren't seasoned gunfighters, they were bullies who'd counted on intimidation rather than actual combat. Next shot won't be a warning, Marcus called out, his rifle already aimed at Tucker, who was struggling to his feet. Tucker's face was flushed with rage and embarrassment. You can't stay awake forever, Kane. We'll be back, and next time we won't be so considerate. Next time, bring the sheriff, Sarah called back. Show him your deed to this land. Oh, that's right too. Don't have one. Tucker's men had gathered around him, helping him mount behind one of the other riders. As they prepared to withdraw, Tucker's voice carried one final threat. This isn't over. You hear me? This isn't over. They rode away, leaving Sarah and Marcus standing in the morning silence, adrenaline still coursing through their veins. Sarah realized she was shaken not from fear, but from the intensity of defending something that had become precious to her. That was well done, Marcus said, lowering his rifle. You held steady. I had good backup. Sarah looked at the man who had emerged from the forest to help her, who had chosen to stand beside her against a threat that wasn't originally his to face. Thank you. Thank you for letting me. They spent the rest of the morning reinforcing their defenses and discussing their options. Tucker would be back, that much was certain, but they'd proven that they wouldn't be easily intimidated, and word of their successful defense would spread. We should ride to town, Marcus said as they worked on the cabin walls. File an official complaint, make sure the sheriff knows what Tucker tried to do. Sarah nodded, but her mind was on other matters. Standing beside Marcus during the confrontation had felt right in a way that went beyond simple partnership. When he'd stepped forward to defend her land, her dream she'd felt something shift inside her chest, a recognition that went deeper than gratitude. They made the trip to Copper Creek that afternoon, riding double on Marcus's sturdy mountain horse. The sheriff, a weathered man named Collins, listened to their account with growing interest. Tucker's been pushing his luck for years, Collins said, leaning back in his chair. But he's been careful to stay just inside the law. Sounds like he finally stepped over the line. What can you do about it? Sarah asked. I'll ride out tomorrow, have a talk with him, make it clear that harassment of legal landowners won't be tolerated. Collins studied Sarah's deed carefully. This is all in order. You've got clear title to that land. As they prepared to leave town, Sarah made an impulsive decision. Marcus, would you mind stopping at the general store? There's something I need to pick up. The store was crowded with late afternoon shoppers, but Sarah